How Hollywood Became and Stays Liberal by Nick Cortez. Early television was afraid of controversy. Nobody wanted to push the envelope. Nobody wanted to offend anybody. Most of the shows were made for the whole family, something the whole family could just gather around and watch during like prime time, which was like around 8, 9 o'clock. There were a lot of westerns. Some of these were Gunsmoke, Bonanza. Some of the most popular westerns back in the day, and that's a picture of an old TV set. Now, the big three networks from back then were NBC, CBS, and ABC. NBC founder was David Sarnoff. He was a right wing. He pushed traditional American values. He was a proud capitalist. And his TV shows that NBC produced were you could tell that they were coming from somebody who was very traditional. William S. Paley, the CEO of CBS, he was a political chameleon in the sense that he would try to kowtow to people like FDR, former President FDR, to keep his advertisers, and he tried to steal affiliates from David Sarnoff. All he really cared about at CBS were ratings. So anything that could help him get more ratings is basically all he cared about. Anything that brought money. Finally, Leonard Goldenson. He was wealthy. He was educated. He went to Harvard Law School. He made a lot of money. He managed to buy United Paramount Theaters, and he ended up buying ABC, and he turned ABC into one of the big network giants. He was very liberal. ABC slowly became the shock value network since he led it, and all three of these guys came from Jewish backgrounds. The rise of ABC. NBC produced its own shows and allowed advertisers to buy spots for them, which was a pretty smart idea at the time. CBS, Paley brought Frank Stanton. He was a genius at finding out what people like to watch and figuring out what the audience really liked. Kept CBS with good ratings through those early TV days. ABC, however, being the less conservative network, struggled to keep up with the ratings since it wasn't mostly liberal back then, and ABC was pushing that shock value network. They struggled to show that type of stuff. In the mid 1950s, however, Oliver Trays came up with one of the best ideas ever, which was to convince the advertisers that they wanted to sell to the young, hip, urban audiences in ABC. And that is essentially the snowball effect that happened for early liberal television, which still happened into the modern times, where advertisers want to sell to the young and hip urban audiences, which they deemed as more valuable. And it allowed the networks to tell the advertisers, hey, it doesn't matter if we lose in the ratings, because as long as we're getting the right advertisers for the young audiences, advertisers will still pay us money, because they'll see that we're producing shows for young people, and they are the people that they want to sell to. Now, money talks. This goes with the whole ratings thing. TVs in 1948 costed $300, which was almost $3,000 in today's dollars. And networks realized that the best way to make money on the TV was to selling advertising spots instead of like actual TV sets. So this made it so that networks transitioned from live TV to tape TV. This was huge as it allowed writers to make tape TV, and they could push the boundaries as to what they would be able to show on television. So by taping shows, they would be able to write up, enough content, enough shows, and push the envelope, push the shock value to, what the networks would allow them to see. And if their shows were successful, they could make the argument like, hey, look, my show's successful, let me put it out. And they could get away with, putting whatever they really wanted on television. Well, not whatever, but it increasingly became more and more liberal as each, show that I will talk about later in this PowerPoint, how, each show got more and more successful. It allowed the writers to keep, making more and more liberal stuff. And in the 1970s, there was largely a break from politics after, the big love hippie movement largely went away, and it was mostly apolitical in the 70s. Shows like The Waltons and Happy Days were popular in networks in like CBS and ABC, since those networks had taken advantage of the largely liberal 60s. However, NBC, since they were mostly still conservative, or back then they hadn't really taken advantage of the whole liberal decade, they had struggled to stay afloat. Other networks were actually making jokes that, like, what's the difference between NBC and the Titanic? That Titanic had a band, so they were basically saying that both of them were gonna sink. NBC was gonna go down. Since in the 1976 to 77 season, NBC only had one show in the top 15 ratings, and that was awful. Eventually, NBC did get back with The Cosby Show. And in the 80s, cable took over HBO home box office, built by Charles Dolan. He built the underground cable underground in New York system. HBO didn't have to comply with the FCC. Since they were a subscription-based service, it was basically sold on its shock value. Like, its whole slogan was, "It's not TV, it's HBO," which basically told the audience, this is not what you're gonna see on your average TV show. And yeah, it sold it to the audience. HBO has always been, more in your face, stuff you don't see on an average TV set, which is one of their big selling points, obviously, with their slogan. It kept being edgy. One of its famous, it's not really a skit, it's more like a stand-up routine. George Carlin, the 7 words you can't say on television. It's a pretty good comedic performance. You should look it up. Yeah, it's one of the early things on cable that you wouldn't be able to see on TV back then. The following shows are shows that I like, and some of them that I found were pretty significant in promoting liberalism on television. The first being The Twilight Zone, 1959 to 1964. Rod Serling, a liberal, he knew he could get away with pushing politics if it was deemed from another dimension, as in The Twilight Zone. One of the episodes was The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It showed the idea that, like, how the way humans could destroy each other was through prejudices like racism and war. The episode is about a kid who tells the neighbors in the neighborhood that there's an alien, and all the neighbors start attacking each other, trying to figure out who it is that's the alien. At the end of the episode, it shows the aliens are actually there, but they're not in the town. It shows like the aliens looking over the neighborhood, and they say, "Oh, this is how you destroy humanity. You get them to fight each other." And Serling, he has a lot of closing narrations. With each episode, he starts with an intro narration and a closing one. This is the one for this one. The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts and attitudes, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of men. For the record, prejudices can kill and suspicion can destroy. and thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own for the children and the children yet unborn. And the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined to the Twilight Zone. All in the Family, 1971 to 1979. The episode pilot issued a warning. The program you are about to see is All in the Family. It seeks to throw a humorous spotlight at our frailties, prejudices, and concerns. By making them a source of laughter, we hope to show in a mature fashion just how absurd they are. This show broke new grounds as it featured the TV's first flushing toilet that you could hear as you're watching it. It was written by Norman Lear. Norman Lear made a lot of shows back then. He became like a big star creator in the TV industry. He wanted to use Archie Bunker. He was the father of the show. And this Archie started a trend of how fathers would be seen in liberal shows. This continued with Homer Simpson and the father in Roseanne. I forgot his name. I haven't seen Roseanne. But where fathers were portrayed as being old-fashioned or not helpful, drunk in the terms of Homer Simpson, but we'll get back to him later. And he used Archie Bunker. He's actually voted by many as being one of the most famous TV show character of all time. But he used Archie to represent all right-wing views and mock them by his younger son. I believe it was his stepson, Meathead. There's a picture of All in the Family down there. Meathead is the one on the tallest one. So Meathead was like his young, hip, liberal son who always debunked all of Archie's right-wing viewpoints. And Archie's points were presented, but they were presented in a way that you could easily debunk them, and it wouldn't show the whole right-wing argument. It tackled a lot of issues like racism, homosexuality, infidelity, rape, the Vietnam War, and many more. Down there is a YouTube clip for a draft dodging scene from the episode. It's pretty good. Basically, Meathead brings his friend who was a draft dodger who had moved to Canada, I believe, and to dodge the draft Vietnam, and Archie gets really offended that he dodged the draft, and Meathead's friend says he couldn't think of enough reasons to kill people as the president had. So he's basically saying, oh, war is bad, without presenting the argument that sometimes war is necessary. And, The Day After. This is probably the most significant made-for-TV movie of all time. The whole point of the movie was discussing what would happen if nuclear war were to break in the States, and what would happen, the fallout of a nuclear war, what happened on a small town. What would happen on a small town. It was the most watched TV movie, and estimated 100 million people watched it. President Reagan actually said that the movie left him feeling depressed, and he changed his mind on nuclear war. Eventually, it led to a treaty between the U.S. and the Soviets to stop the arms race. The nuclear arms. And basically, it made a lot of people panic. When the movie first premiered on networks, everybody was, the networks were warning parents not to let their kids watch it, as it might, be very graphic for them. And fun fact, you can actually watch this movie on YouTube. Last time I checked, it was on there, so give it a watch. Cops, 1989 to 2020, and 2020 till maybe later. So, Cops, it was found that even conservative shows, Cops are liberal in Hollywood. According to Michael Moore, Cops has a lot of minorities in its showing, Hispanics and blacks, getting caught by the cops, breaking the law. And he said that it betrayed blacks and Hispanics, bad, with bad stereotypes. Oh, blacks and Hispanics are always the one breaking the law. But the creator, John Langley, said that the show actually showed a lot more white people than people of color, than what you really see in prison systems when you look at, real, like, white people and minorities in the prison system. In the prison system, it's like about 60% people of color and 30% white people. But in the show, in Cops, they would show 60% white people and 30% other, colored people of color. So, John Langley was basically saying that he was receiving criticism for even showing even some people of color, even though he was showing way less than the actual stats proved. As of right now, Cops aired its last episode, May 11th, 2020, after the George Floyd tragedy. And, some people were hoping that it does eventually come back after, these racial tensions go away, but, we'll see. And is a funny meme for you guys. I'm gonna give it a minute for you to read. House MD. Well, one of my favorite shows, 2004 to 2012. It's a balanced yet liberal show. House is an anti-hero. He doesn't care about offending people. He says on the show, oh, not everybody deserves respect. Not everybody deserves to be cared for or, respected, basically. He's politically incorrect. He's basically a pretty balanced show in the way that it shows both sides of the argument most of the time. It tackled issues like euthanasia, abortion, the death penalty, abuse. In the season 3, it shows 2 episodes in particular. They were centered about abortion, fetal position in 1 day, 1 room, where the abortion, which is a pretty hot topic, a lot of people have different views on it. Where it showed both sides of the political aisle, and it showed the right wing point of view in a good way, where the average person who doesn't really know much about abortion or like doesn't really look into it as much would understand both sides, or at least understand the right wing side, which doesn't get portrayed well in many shows. And Carl Penn, he got a position in the White House staff for the Obama administration after Obama took office, and they killed off his character in the show. I believe he committed suicide. It happened in the mid to later seasons. And finally, there's a cool house quote down there, an anti-religious house quote. Give you a couple seconds to read it. The Simpsons, one of my favorite shows. 1989 to present. It mocked religion, Christianity. Characters like Ned Flanders and Reverend Lovejoy were seen as the annoying Christians of the show. Specifically Ned Flanders. So you could make an argument that he's one of the most annoying, at least, TV animated characters of all time. Mr. Burns mocks big business capitalists. Mr. Burns is seen as the evil corporate guy who's greedy. Another trend that happened with Archie Bunker, Homer Simpson portrayed the father as being, bad, like lazy, drunk. An episode in season 10 tackled same-sex marriage, I believe. The episode's called There's Something About Marrying, and I believe that same-sex marriage was legalized in Springfield on that episode. This was 7 years before it became legal around everywhere in the States. And there are other breaking left-leaning shows. The Mary Tyler Moore Show, 1970 to 1977, promoted the feminist agenda, which was about, a woman doesn't have to get married to be fulfilled, or, if women don't want to get married or have kids, she shouldn't have to. She can be independent, do whatever she wants. MASH, another anti-war show, mainly focused, mocked the military, traditional values, and religion, basically mocking Vietnam. A lot of shows back then, a lot of shows, liberal leaning, mocked Vietnam back then. It was everybody wanted to mock Vietnam, and everybody was anti-Vietnam. Even today, people are still get really in their feelings when talking about Vietnam, especially if they were around at that time and they opposed it. Soap, 1977 to 1981, featured the first openly gay character on TV, Jody Dallas. I believe it was the third or second episode. There's Jody Dallas, the character. He's gay, and he talks with his father about accepting him as not as a gay person, but just as a human being, as a person. Basically, promoting the acceptance of homosexuals. It's pretty big back then, as he was like the first openly gay character on TV. As I said, Maud, 1972 to 1978. It was I believe it was the first episode that tackled abortion. It had a two-part episode where the main character, Maud, had an abortion. This was, I believe, days after or right before Roe v. Wade was happened. The abortion case, Roe v. Wade. Finally, how TV stays liberal. Creators and actors. Excuse me. Creators and actors live in a bubble. They are what people like me would call limousine liberals. Basically, liberals that they don't really preach what they say because they don't want to accept the fact that they are living way too lavish. They're living lavishly, and they're criticizing the system that helped them get to where they are. So a limousine liberal would be like somebody that criticizes you for driving your car and driving your car to go around the city or whatever, go for a ride, and using your normal energy at your house, but then they got like a big mansion that uses probably 10 times that amount of energy that you use at your house in one day that you would use in your house for like a month. Or they use a big limousine to drive around, but you just use your normal budget car, and they criticize you for it. Liberals, liberals creators, who create these shows, they hire their friends on set, and their friends essentially get promoted and start writing their own shows. That's usually how the business is. You have to know somebody in Hollywood most of the time. However, most creators do admit that there is a blacklist towards conservatives. The conservatives who do make it in Hollywood don't really come out as conservatives, and if they do, they don't come out until they make it. Kelsey Grammer, he's one of the most successful conservatives in Hollywood, said that the best strategy is to keep quiet about your politics, unless you're thinking the correct way, which is the liberal way, basically. How TV stays liberal. Continued. Writers argue that they want to make things realistic. So they argue that they think the same way a random family in Alabama would think. And they make shows that family would deem believable. But really, they make shows that they seem believable in their own liberal minds. They argue that if people could just turn it off or switch the channel if they don't like it. But this argument is flawed, as it assumes that the person has something really else to tune into, At least this argument made a lot of sense. This argument that I'm making, that somebody would have something else to tune into. This would make sense back in the day when people really did watch TV. Nowadays, we just have Netflix and Hulu. So it's largely gone away. But, Yeah, this was a big argument back then to keep pushing the liberal propaganda. Um, and liberal writers argue that they are more empathetic, creative, and talented than the right wing counterparts. But this is a very discriminatory argument, kind of messed up. Basically, the same argument that big companies had to not give jobs to blacks back in the Jim Crow era. Basically, saying black people couldn't do the same as white people. Liberals do still dominate the business, and conservatives are still looking for the Jackie Robinson to, you know, or Jackie Robinsons, since it's mostly liberal. Conservatives who do come out, they lose friends, contacts, and jobs, which can't which makes sense as to why most people don't come out and say that they are conservative, especially not just in Hollywood but everywhere. Nowadays, you get canceled if you are seen not supporting the liberal agenda, not just in Hollywood but everywhere. And finally, people love television. It's hard to turn it off. We love TV. We get home from work and want to unwind in some television. We're tired. We just want to watch some television. We're alone. Maybe we're eating a snack or something. We turn on Netflix or turn on Hulu, whatever. People love TV. It's hard to get away from it. And I think TV is essentially here to stay. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Finally, one more thing I want to say. I'm not saying liberalism is bad. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. I'm not saying we should censor everything, but I'm just saying we should keep in mind what we're watching and know to think for ourselves. And to, if we question something on television, we should try to see the other side of the argument. And yeah, that's how TV became liberal.